Hi, welcome to the Corner of Knit and Tea, episode 386. My name is Laura. I'm also known as Fluffy Kira on Instagram and Twitter. I blog over at thecornerofknitandtea.com, and that's where this episode and every episode show notes will be. And I have an Etsy shop called The Corner of Knit and Tea, where I sell my hand-spun yarns and knitting patterns. Hi, how are you? It is Monday, and now I have to think about it, July 25th. I can hardly believe the month is over. And I am coming to you from just outside Kansas City on a slightly gray and dreary day. Our triple-digit heat has broken, and we had storms this morning and all of last night. And when I checked around noon, it was still around 70 degrees, so I think this week is going to be a little cooler for us. And I could not be more thrilled because last week was quite a doozy. So I hope that you are doing well. Yesterday concluded the Tour de France, and I have decided to extend my Tour de Fleece for just a little while longer, and I will tell you why a little bit later in the episode. I will say by the time you see this, I will probably have already drawn for prizes. Everyone who participated in the team in any way, either using the hashtag, chatting on Facebook, or in the Ravelry group, I put you all into a drawing and drew for several prizes. So if you got a note from me on one of those platforms, please let me know, and I will get your prizes out to you. So I hope that you are having a lovely week. We are T-minus 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks until I go on vacation. So starting today, my schedule is a little crazy. I'm trying to work ahead and basically get the whole month of August covered. I will not be gone for the whole month in August, but the week before I leave will be tearing my hair out trying to get everything done for the 2 weeks while I'm gone. And then, of course, the week that I get back, I will be drinking from a fire hose. So my plan is to try and get as much done for the entire month as I can before I leave, so that maybe the first week I come back, I'll get eased into things. Because, of course, craft season starts in September. Crafting and holiday and the big epic season for crafters starts soon. And I haven't felt the siren call of sweaters yet, but I know that that is coming. And so I know that I will come home and be thrust right back into everything. My day job is I do marketing for a small agency, and we work with crafty clients. So my work and my hobbies and everywhere intersects. So I hope that you are doing well. Let's talk about crafting this week. I have a few finishes to share with you, which I am super excited about. And then I have a few new cast-ons or needle-adjacent cast-ons. And of course I have some spinning to show you. So today I am drinking a strawberry black tea. This was a tea that my husband got me, and I'm embarrassed to say probably 2 or 3 years ago for Valentine's Day from David's Teas. It was an eight sweet tea set. I don't know if they have all of these. Some of them they still do. This one is, this is chocolate covered strawberry. So this is apple, hibiscus blossoms, white chocolate pieces, cocoa beans, cocoa peels, natural strawberry and chocolate flavoring, carrot, beetroot, raisins, roasted chicory root, yerba mate, strawberries, and a little bit of stevia. So that is what's in this one. This was 8 kind of romance-themed teas, and I do like David's teas. Each sample in there makes about 2 cups of tea, so it was just a nice little gift pack, and I am drinking that in my Oy Vey all-day mug, which honestly is perfect for every Monday, because every Monday is a little bit of Oy Vey. Except for my husband, who is actually off this week. And he went out bike riding for 3/4 of the day and is loving the cooler weather. So let's talk about crafting. I have 2 finished objects this week, both of which you have seen before, one of which is almost complete but not, well, actually both of them are almost complete but not quite. I will tell you for both of them. So the first one is I knit a charity hat out of my hand spun. It is still quite wet, which is why it isn't 100% finished yet, but this was some hand spun that I spun up several years ago, and I pulled it out of the bin and decided to make it into a really tall stocking hat. It actually got a little bit long, but my thought is that if it's too long, they can just go ahead and fold up the brim a little bit, and they'll still have a real nice and cozy hat. So this was, I cannot remember who dyed this. It was either Southern Cross Fiber or Hello Yarn. I think it might have been Hello Yarn. It was on Romney, and it reminded me of summer fruits. You've got your peach in there, and your nectarine, and your plums, and just all kinds of berries and summer fruits, and I think it knit up really nicely. If you remember, I told you that I actually held the yarn doubled because I spun this to kind of a thin weight, and I am sending it to Wool Aid, which likes their hats to be knit out of worsted or bulky. So I took my Sport to DK weight and I doubled it up, and it actually, I was a little concerned about how it was going to look because I was a little concerned the color areas weren't going to overlap that well, but it turns out that I spun pretty consistently in terms of color repeats and stuff, so I got some really, really nice variation and marling, and it doesn't look too crazy, despite the fact that I used two opposite ends of the yarn. I love that it like lined up in the peachy sections a little bit and in the purple, and I just love the progression of this hat. Now, this hat is almost done because it doesn't have a pom-pom yet, and I need a pom-pom because I have just enough left to really do a fun pom-pom. So my plan is to do that tonight. I decided that I didn't want to dunk the pom-pom in the water, so I went ahead and washed and blocked the hat, and as I said, it's still damp. It still needs another day to dry, but I'm going to go ahead and make a pom-pom out of the leftovers tonight, and then hopefully use that all up, and that is another skein out of stash and away, which would be lovely. And this skein was right around 300 yards, so I think it was like 297 maybe. So that will just be another skein out of stash and into a hat that someone could use. And I'm starting to get excited because, of course, as fall comes, which is you know, still at least a month away. Well, technically, I guess about 45 days away. Well, a little more than that, 50 days away. Even though fall is not quite here yet, it will be here soon, and I would love to have some more hats to send by the time the weather is going to turn. So that is definitely a good finished object. I might have chance to crank out another hat before I leave town. I don't know if I will. If I can, I will probably try and throw that in there, but I do have other projects that I'm working on and excited about and would like to get done before I leave, so I don't know if there will be another hat. I do anticipate that maybe over Thanksgiving or Christmas this year I will go on a hat knitting binge, which will be great because I can replenish the coffers and send those off as well. But if I could get a few more done before the cold temperatures start to hit, I would feel better about that. So we'll see. I have a few things pulled aside. We'll see what I can do. So the big finish for this week, actually, excuse me, let me just take a sip of tea. The big finish this week is actually Roxy's sweater, Cinnamon. So the pattern is Cinnamon by Elena Nodell, who sadly passed away a few years ago, but her patterns are great, and the proceeds from her patterns still go to benefit her husband and young daughter. Well, I guess she's probably not as young as she was. She was I think around 10 when her mom passed away. So the funds still go to a great cause, and she's got some really great designs, particularly kids and like girls going into teens. And tweens and teen designs. And I chose Cinnamon, and I decided to knit it in a colorway called Rosie from Dream in Color. In their Classy, which is their worsted base, 250 yards to the skein, and the colorway is kind of a rosy pink with some peachy coral colors in there. And you might recall that as we chatted last time, I was concerned about running out of yardage, and I was a little bit on hold because I was waiting for another skein to come. The skein did arrive. It is slightly more orange than the previous sweater, but I don't think it's super, super noticeable, and I kind of faded it in down at the bottom of the sweater, so I don't think you can tell. And I have almost a full skein left over, so I would have almost made it, but I broke into this probably. It's kind of confusing because I didn't, I broke into this one right away because I wanted to start fading it in, but I didn't quite finish what I had. So I think overall I might not have needed the skein, or might just have needed it just a little bit, but I finished the whole thing. I didn't have to do contrasting color pockets, and this is at least 200 yards, which means it is plenty to go ahead and knit Roxy a hat as well for the fall. So that will definitely be a cast on soon, not for my donations, but for Miss Roxy. So let me show you the sweater. Now, I say that it's almost done. All the knitting is done. All except for the final two ends are woven in. And the big thing that it needs a good blocking, which I don't know that I'm going to get to before I leave on vacation. I might just wait and do that when I get home. And it needs some buttons or toggles. And I haven't really found what I needed, and Roxy's birthday isn't until October, and we have our area yarn crawl in mid-September. So I decided that I'm just going to wait. I'll block the sweater when I get home. I will finish weaving in the ends and trim everything, and then in September when I go on our local area yarn crawl, which will be to, I think, 4 or 5 stores, I'm going to look for some buttons, and then worst case scenario, I'll go to Joann's and get some buttons. But the bulk of all the knitting is done, almost all the finishing work is done except for these like last two ends, blocking and sewing on buttons. So I am comfortable calling it done, even though it's not quite done, but it is basically done, and not much work remains for me between now and the end of October. So let me show you the sweater. Of course, because it's not blocked and there are ends sticking out, you know, it's not perfect. I will definitely shoot photos of it when I finish it and maybe even bring it back to show you. But this is Cinnamon. Cinnamon is a top-down sweater with a really cozy, extra tall collar, and then it is kind of a swing coat. It does kind of grow kind of in an A-line out to the bottom, and it's got lots and lots of nice details. So the main pattern, I made some modifications. I'll talk about that in a minute. So the main pattern is this ribbed stitch, which basically is a certain number of reverse stockinette stitches in between this one knit stitch. So it creates this really kind of pinstripe ribbing, and you increase in between those pinstripes to get sort of the A-line texture on there. I went ahead and did pockets. I think I modified my pockets slightly from what she calls for, but the sweater itself is supposed to be a little bit of a longer swing coat and then have some really cute pockets towards the bottom. So my modifications. One, the sweater called for short sleeves, and so I just adapted and made my own long sleeves. I decided that knitting a sweater for my niece, who lives in the Chicago general area where it is freaking cold, needed a sweater with long sleeves if I was going to knit her a sweater coat for fall. So I went ahead and knit sleeves. I did a bunch of decreases and went all the way down to the end. I knit these sleeves just a little bit on the long side in the hope that maybe she'll get a couple years out of this sweater. I should say I knit this sweater in, she is going to be 9, so I knit the sweater in the 9 to 10 size. It's either 8 to 9 or 9 to 10. Whatever encompassed 9, I did it. And then so because there wasn't any sleeve length prescribed in the pattern because it called for super short sleeves, I went ahead to the Craft Yarn Council's website and looked for what range a 9 to 10-year-old should have in arm length, and then I went ahead and added another inch or inch and a half on top of that, figuring that then she can just wear this for another year or two. I did a 1x1 ribbed cuff because it matched the button bands and the collar itself, and I left that long enough that it's probably, I think it's 2 inches. So my thought is that if she wants to, if the sweater is too long this year, and of course ignore the ends because they are woven in, but I haven't clipped them yet, she can just go ahead and cuff that up. So that is that. The collar was a 1x1 rib, which I also did. It calls for some oversized buttons on the top. Again, I have not gotten those yet. And then the button band itself is a 1x1 rib, kind of offsetting that pinstripe pattern. The pockets, they had a couple ways you could do it. You could knit a round pocket and just attach it to the back, kind of as like a little floating pocket. You could do a patch pocket, and I did neither of those because I don't particularly like the way those work. So what I did was, at the appropriate point, I put some stitches on waste yarn and cast on again. I knit the front of my pocket sort of contiguous with the sweater. I did a little bit of 1x1 rib at the top and then stuck in my patterning until the bottom. And then what I did is I knit the pocket. Well, okay, So I got that far, and then I went ahead and knit a back of the pocket. I picked back up where I had put everything on stitches. I knit a stockinette pocket on the inside, and then I went down to where I was going to start my ribbing at the edge, and on the first row of my ribbing, I bound one off from the front needle, one from the back needle, and closed the pocket inside so that I did not even have to seam it. It is just all together there in the ribbing band. I did that because every time I seam a pocket, I always find that I don't seam it super well and their fingers can poke in the bottom, and I did not want that. So then I just seamed the two sides closed with a little bit of whip stitch, and again, all my ends are woven in. I just haven't clipped them yet. I don't clip my ends before blocking because sometimes in blogging things grow and stretch and then the ends pop out again, and I find that super annoying. So I usually weave in all my ends right before I block, and then I just go ahead and clip them after I block. So it doesn't take me that long to do that. And then the hem, I did make some minor changes. The hem called for the button band to be knit kind of as it was, the 1x1 rib, and then it called for all the sections in between to be knit in 2x2 ribbing. The problem with knitting 2x2 ribbing is that for the size that I was knitting, that would have meant that these pinstripes would not flow directly into the hem. I would have had 2x2 ribbing that didn't match up with the pinstripes on the body. And I am extremely type A, and I like my details to match. And so I redesigned the ribbing and kind of alternated between 2x2 and 1x1 as I needed to, so that I could be sure that my pinstripe added up there. So that is what I did. Those are the few modifications that I made. Again, it is basically done. It just needs a really good blocking. But the spare bed is starting to be a packing staging area where we're dropping things that we're going to need to take with us on our trip. So my blocking surface is gone right now, and I will probably wait to do this until after the trip. But I think that is good and done. Because it is a little longer, it took me approximately 1,000 yards, which is probably why, part of the reason why it took so long to knit. The other reason was that I got about 3/4 of the way through the project and just stalled. I don't know. I didn't really want to do the sleeves. I probably because there wasn't a pattern, so it wasn't easy knitting. I had to think about what it was that I wanted to do. They weren't that hard. They really weren't that hard. I just decreased a few stitches every 8 or 10 rounds or so. But just when there's not a prescribed pattern and I'm looking for something that's mentally easy, it was just too much, and then I had to figure out how I wanted to do the pockets and order an extra skein and whatnot, but I really think that this is going to be a really cute sweater. I think she's going to love it. Part of the reason that I selected this sweater is because I remember as a kid that I always wanted to feel a little bit more grown up, and I certainly don't want to push anything off onto her, but I hit a point where I didn't want my clothes to be cute. I wanted them to look kind of sophisticated so I could feel a little bit older. Now, I am also not the type of person who's going to knit non-age appropriate clothing for my niece. She is 8, she'll be 9, and I do not want her to wear things that bear her midriff and some of those kinds of things. It's not that I'm a prude about those things, but I also don't want to contribute to sexualizing children, and also I don't want to run afoul of anything that my sister might feel about what is appropriate for her child or not. That said, I selected the sweater because it looked a little bit more sophisticated than some of the girls' sweaters that I see out there, and I wanted her to kind of feel a little bit older. So that was why I picked this. I'm really pleased. It was a lovely pattern. Like I said, I did do a few modifications, but mostly the only one that I did because I didn't understand why the designer did that way was the hem. Everything else I did because I preferred it, not because it wasn't an okay method. The only one that really, like I said, made me a little crazy was the hem not matching up, because I would knit a row and then I would rip it out and then I would knit a little bit and then I would rip it out, and I was trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to achieve the look that I wanted. And so yeah, so that is that. Thank you for listening to me wax on poetically about sweaters and things that I like to knit and how I knit them. I realize it's not everyone's cup of tea, but that's cup of tea. I did want to share some of the details. So I have one thing that I did cast on this week, though I didn't do that much work, and then I have one thing that I'm going to cast on, and so these will be the projects that you will likely see me working on for the next couple weeks. So the first thing is I finished Roxy's sweater. Now it is time to turn my attention to my nephew, who is Miles. And Miles will be 6 this fall. He is growing like a weed, and so I wanted to knit him a sweater that would be perfect for him. And I think I talked about last week that I'm sort of doing a Super Mario Brothers inspired sweater for him. I am at the boring part of that, which is I am just knitting a fairly plain top-down raglan, and then I'm going to duplicate stitch what I want to do. I didn't really want to try and mess with the intarsia. It certainly won't work for chart knitting because Fair Isle knitting, because really what I envision is like a character at the bottom of one side and maybe some stuff running across, a little bit like you do in the video game. So I decided that I was just going to give up and duplicate stitch it afterwards. I do have some charts. I mentioned that last week. I'm not going to mention it again because I don't want to draw too much attention to it. So I started knitting. The pattern that I chose is called Crozon, or Crozon. It's Crozon, and it is by Lisa Chemery, who is also known as Frogginette Knits. And I have knit several of her patterns before. She almost exclusively writes children's patterns, and I have found that they are well written, they are easy, they are nice looking, and like I said, while I certainly could make up my own pattern, at least right now at where my brain space is at this stage in the pandemic and with work and with everything else, I just wanted a pattern to follow. One of the things you will notice if you go look at that pattern is that it is actually written to be striped, and I'm not striping it, but that really does not matter because she basically just at a certain point says you will now start striping here till the bottom, so alternate every X rows, and I'm just ignoring that. It is basically a top-down raglan. It's got a little bit of short row shaping around the back of the neck, so it will bring that up a little bit, which I find makes the sweaters fit really nicely. And so basically all I have done is started it. I'm a couple inches in. I cast on, and at this point I have finished the collar and I have finished the short rows at the back, and I am just starting into the raglan shaping. You can see I have my markers placed. This is also Dream in Color, the classy, the worsted weight, and the colorway is Bedtime, which is a really, really gorgeous kind of royal blue, and it is a semi-solid, but it definitely has just a little bit of variation, which makes it interesting. And I showed you last week, although it is actually in a different spot now, I really should just put it in this bag. I do have a skein of kind of a really, really, really bright green that I will use to put Luigi and a few other characters on here when I am done. So if I had my druthers, if I could finish the raglan shaping before I left for vacation, that would be great. If I don't get to it, that's okay, because I will have August and September and part of October to finish his sweater, and also he is smaller, and I will have a little bit less thinking to do on this one. And also Roxy's sweater was overly long because it's sort of meant to be a sweater coat, and his is just going to be a basic raglan sweater that will probably end at his waist. So I have significantly less knitting to do on this one, which will also leave me more time for the finishing work later. And again, this one won't get interesting until I start duplicate stitching, because it's just going to be a plain blue pullover with no real details other than, you know, it's got a 1x1 ribbing at the collar. So this is going to be a real plain sweater until the end, when I hope to have a lot of fun with it, and I think he's going to love it. And I really need to do this for him this year because he's going to turn 6 and he's going to go to kindergarten, and I realize that my days of making him fun character sweaters are probably somewhat limited, at least until he's an adult and goes into fandoms, because I assume that there is going to be an age at which the children are like, hand knit sweaters? No, I want everything store-bought, because a lot of kids go through that, and that is fine with me, but I want to take advantage of some of the cool things I can do while I can. So that will be on the list this week. Hopefully I'll have some progress to show you next week, but I don't expect to actually hit my goal just yet. I will just keep cranking on this. So the next project that I will be casting on, likely either this evening or tomorrow, is a project for Zen Yarn Garden. It's time to do another sample. What I am going to be knitting, and I didn't bring my phone so I can't show you a picture of it, I will link it in the episode show notes, which are over at thecornerofknitnt.com, is I am going to be knitting Pop and Lock, and that is a new sort of combination cowl shawl designed by Lisa Ross. And it's one of those fingering weight knitting projects. It calls for approximately, I think, between 500 and 600 yards of fingering weight yarn. And what it is you sort of knit it as a shawl, but then at the end you kind of seam the two back sections together as kind of a cowl. But so you have a shawl that kind of wears bandana style in the front, and you don't actually have to fasten it. It will stay in one place. And I really like that style. I have knit a couple of those for myself, and I really find them useful, particularly when I want to dress up a little bit and I don't want to constantly have to worry about my shawl falling off. Anyway, so the shawl itself is it is mostly done in a dark color, so I am using Zen Yarn Garden's Superfine Fingering, which is their 90% Superfine Superwash Merino, 10% nylon in the colorway Midnight, which is just a basic black. And then I am using one of their mini skeins, and I put the bag away, and now I don't know what splatter colorway this is. I will have to pull it out and figure it out so I can put it in the show notes. This is a fun splatter colorway, and that's going to be used for a little bit of well, so there's a little bit of mosaic colorwork and there's a little bit of lace. So this is a white, and it's got hot pink and purple and blue and green in it, and it's really just fun, and I think it's going to set off really nicely against this black. These are similar colorways to what the designer used. I'm not sure what she used as her speckle colorway, and she did not originally do it in Zen Yarn Garden. I think she originally did it in Miss Babs, although I could be wrong about that. But we're going to go ahead and knit up a sample of that because that will be a fun fall kit. I am hoping, because it's only, I have 600 yards right here in my hot little hands, and because it's a little bit less than that, I am hoping that I can crank this out in the 2 weeks and a couple days before I leave on vacation and send it off to the photographer. That will be a challenge, but it's also why Miles' sweater may not see a ton of work, because I would love to get this one done. I also have I have a kit for a sweater. I'm going to be knitting a fingering weight cardigan for them, which will probably be a September knit. And then she put another one in there, and she put a tag on it to name the pattern, and I haven't gone to look it up. I think it's a shawl pattern, but I don't know for sure. So my sample knitting is well set out before me. So let me turn my attention to spinning for just a bit, and I will talk to you a little bit about that. So last week I showed you my spin for my chicken yarn, and I was able to complete one more spin between then and now. I'm not sure where my time went. I know I didn't spin a couple nights this past week for one reason or another. I think I just got busy, and there were things going on, and I just didn't have time to sit at my wheel. We did continue to watch the Tour de Fleece. We did continue to watch the Tour de France, and I spun for the Tour de Fleece, and the final braid that I spun is this gorgeous skein right here. This was a skein that a bump that I picked up at Plyaway. It was from Desert Panda Fiber Arts, and it was a 70/30 merino Tessa silk in gorgeous colorways, and it was called My Favorite Leggings. And the reason that I picked it up was because there was some subtle variation in how the silk took the dye. Often when I find merino silk braids, the silk either takes the dye a little bit, or it ends up still as kind of white within the merino silk blend. And so when I go ahead and spin it, I get little bits of white, or it just kind of softens the color. When I spun this one, there were actually bits and pieces of silk in there that took the fiber dye even darker than some of the areas around it. And it gave a lot of variation, and I thought that was really, really cool. Now, so I don't often spin with intention, I should say. Oftentimes I play with the braid. I'm not a super technical spinner. I don't count my spinning revolutions. I don't do control cards. I just don't technically spin. Honestly, what I usually do is I spin by feel. I sit down with the braid, and the braid either spins super thin really easily, or it does not. And so I sort of go from there. I loosely had in my mind that this braid was going to spin super thin, and so I decided that I was going to do what I have done quite a few times before, and it doesn't always work out, which is I was going to divide the braid in half lengthwise, and then I was going to spin each single straight through so that then I could ply the two, and it would give me basically a gradient spin. Now the problem with that is that if you don't divide very accurately, your gradients move at different paces, and then they stop lining up. And when I do the gradient spin like that, I don't mind if there's a little bit adjustment in the boundaries, because if you have two colors together, sometimes it transitions the way to the next color. So in this braid, let's say I have two strands of the pink together. If one of the strands of the pink moves to purple a little bit sooner than the other strand, then I have kind of a pink and purple blending together before I get to purple and purple. So it creates a little bit of interest in the gradient so that it's not just one color, then the next color, then the next color. I really like it when that happens. The problem is that I am not great at dividing my braids vertically, and I almost never go to the process where I weigh them, so oftentimes my bobbins are very imbalanced. Such was the case with this spin. And I sort of knew it when I started with the first part of the braid, that it was a little bit less chunky than the second part of the braid, but I really knew it when I picked up the second part of the braid and was like, oh yeah, that's not half on that first bobbin, that's probably a third, between a third to 3/8, and then I've got leftovers here. So in my infinite wisdom, rather than turning it into a fractal spin or doing something else, I thought, why don't I just try spinning the second part of the braid just a little bit thicker than I spun the first part of the braid, and then maybe they will line up. It sort of worked. I was sort of successful. I guess I'm getting a little bit more successful at sort of navigating between real thin and then just a little bit thicker and a little bit thicker and a little bit thicker. I ended up finishing fairly close to having the gradients land on top of each other, and I only had a very little bit left on one bobbin, maybe just a couple grams left on one bobbin over the other bobbin, which is really great considering that I did not that I did not plan this in any way. The bigger problem was that I didn't consider that if I had a much thinner yarn and a much thicker yarn, that it wouldn't ply evenly, and so it would end up almost a little bit like a boucle yarn, and not to the extreme, but would almost end up like a boucle yarn, or like when you ply a thick yarn with like thread, you know, you create lots of artistic bumps. Now, this is not super artistic because, again, I'm not talking a huge difference. It's not like I spun one bulky and I spun one lace weight. But it didn't quite deliver the overall effect that I was going for. So despite that, I am somewhat pleased with this. This is a gradient spin, and you can see that the colors kind of move in a gradient. You can see there are areas where they overlap, and there are areas where they are just by themselves very nicely. You can see a little bit if you look real close up. That's going to be hard. Let me see if I can put this back together in a way that you'll be able to see. There are some sections where you can definitely tell that one ply is thicker than the other ply, and it looks kind of uneven in plying. I think you can see a little bit of that there. The blue is kind of blowing out the camera, but you can see here that there are definitely some issues where one ply was much thinner than the other ply, and so it creates a slightly nubbly yarn. This is a really beautiful yarn because it is merino silk, so it is super soft. It would be perfect for next to the neck. I'm a little bit disappointed in the yardage because I got great yardage on the first bobbin, but then I went ahead and bulked it up a little bit on the second bobbin. It came out to be about 300 yards, which is basically about a DK weight. So there's not as much yardage here as I had hoped, because I had hoped maybe I'd spin, 400 or 400 plus, because it was spinning so thin and beautifully, that then you'd be able to do something like a gradient shawl. And that is not the case. It will make some really nice accessories. You can make some beautiful mitts out of it. You could make a hat. You could make a cowl. You could probably make some kind of a shawlette, or a little bit like the cowl that I... not the one I'm talking about doing in fingering weight, but there are a number of kind of shawl cowl combos. Karina Spencer has a few that are done in DK weight and higher, and so you might be able to find something lovely to do with that. I will be putting this one in the shop, but as I said, it's not 100% my best planned spin, and I will note in the listing that there is that the plies are slightly different thicknesses, and it gives a slightly textured yarn. So that is the last skein that I spun for the tour, and I have not added it all up, but I should be able to tell you, I think if you do not count the spin that I finished at the start of the tour, because I did not spin it over the tour, I spun I spun 28 ounces during the tour, which is a pound, 1¾ pounds. So I spun a lot during the tour. I did spin a little bit thicker than I usually spin on the yarn for the chicken. So that is why my yardage will not be quite as much as it has been in previous years. I think I got 400 and some odd yards for the first skein that I finished in the tour. And then I probably got around 1,000 yards from my 1¼ pound. Usually that would be more like 1,200 or 1,300. And then this one came out to about 300 yards. So all told, that's probably 1,700 or 1,800 yards. So I'm pleased with that. Normally when I finish the tour, after I spin, do nothing but spin for 3 weeks, I get away from my spinning wheel for a little while. However, for 2 reasons, I am continuing to spin. The first reason is that this year, the Tour de France, which is exclusively the Tour de France historically has been a men's bike race. Over the years, there have been a couple iterations of trying to get together some kind of Tour de France-like race for women. They have not lasted very long. This year, they are premiering the Tour de France Femmes, which means women, avec Zwift, which means with Zwift. Zwift is sponsoring it. And so starting yesterday, early in the day, before the men's tour concluded in Paris, the women's tour started in Paris. The women's tour is shorter. It's only running for 8 days. But I decided that because I'm also going to be going away in August, because I have a lot of stuff going on, I will likely not use my wheel much in August, because I'm not taking it with me. This is not that kind of trip. I'll share more about what I'm doing in a future podcast. But because I am not taking my wheel with me, I decided to spend the next 8 days continuing to spin while we watch the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift. So I have started another spin. This was a braid that I pulled aside. It was the final braid that I pulled aside to try and spin during the tour, and I did not get to spin it. That would have brought me up to 2 pounds during the tour, which would have been great, but I'm not going to beat myself up over it because I did plenty, and I also got some knitting done. This braid is called Heavy Weather. It was the April 2022 club for Hello Yarn. It's got a lot of different things in it. It's got some swampy greens and some jewel-toned greens and blues going into purples, and then we've got some browns and russets, and there's a little bit of lavender in here, which is not super characteristic of her, but I know that she always includes what she calls a poison color, which is technically a color that doesn't entirely go with the rest, to be kind of a contrast color. And I don't technically know if the green was supposed to be the poison or if the lavender was, but she doesn't put lavender in a lot of things, and I just think it adds a really nice light color to all of the rest of the colors that are in here. I am showing you half the braid because part of it is already on my spinning wheel. This is Falkland. It is spinning up really nicely, and my plan is to finish 1 more braid this week. It will not be part of my total for Tour de France, or maybe it will be, I don't know. But I'm going to spin for 1 more week in front of the television while watching bike racing because it's fun and it's summer and I can. The official contest for the official event, as I host it in my group with prizes, and it's more or less a Ravelry event. It was originally a Ravelry event. I have moved it off Ravelry to encompass those who cannot use Ravelry. I do not want to be Ravelry centric. That said, the whole event Tour de Fleece was very much designed for the men's Tour de France and to be over when the tour is over. So what I decided is, in deference to those who maybe don't want to continue spinning, who are sick of spinning, who are sore from spinning, I am going to go ahead and end the official event and draw for prizes this evening and kind of close out that chapter of the tour. Whether or not I will include an extra week in next year's tour, I presume if the women's tour is successful, they will do it again next year. Whether or not I will sort of expand it into, rather than a 3 to 4 day event, expand it to a full month-long event, I don't know. But for those of you who would like to join along with me, or who are having fun spinning for the women's tour, you're welcome to continue spinning and sharing progress and posting photos. There will be no more prizes. This is just for fun, but that's what I'm going to do for the next week. And if you have enjoyed it as much as I have, and you would like to spend 1 more week at it because you just couldn't get enough, please do join me. So, Thank you for listening to me ramble on. It has been a bit of a longer podcast today, which is nice. I feel like I guess I haven't had that much to show you because I feel like I was working on that sweater forever. But yeah. So I hope that you have a wonderful week ahead. I hope that you are staying well, that your weather has cooled off a little bit for those of you who are in hot climates. I say that particularly to my friends across the pond in Europe who have been facing really hot temperatures, as have we. And I hope that you find something fun to craft this week that brings you a little bit of joy, because with the world today, we could all use a little bit of joy. So I will say, until I see you again, happy knitting, happy spinning, happy sipping, and I'll see you